She was on her knees on the scorching Chicago pavement, hands cuffed behind her back so tight the metal bit into bone. The hood of the patrol car burned through her jeans, the July sun turning steel into a griddle. Commander William Drake pressed the sole of his boot against her shoulder blade and laughed. Actually laughed as her district attorney badge clattered across the concrete, spinning once before settling face up in a puddle of motor oil. District attorney? His voice dripped with contempt, that particular Chicago accent sharpened into a weapon. He bent down, picked up the badge between two fingers like it was contact. They thought she was powerless. They were wrong about the second part. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from in the comments. This is the story of how one prosecutor brought down a corruption machine that had been running for 15 years. Not with backup, not with official support, but with something far more dangerous. 18 months of evidence that couldn't be ignored. And every word of what you're about to hear, it's all on tape. They thought Rosa Mendez was just another Latina journalist asking too many questions, writing too many articles about police misconduct in the South Side. They were wrong. She was Assistant District Attorney Rosa Mendez, Cook County Prosecutor's Office, badge number 4782. And she had 18 months of recordings, 18 months of testimony, 18 months of receipts that detailed exactly how Commander Drake and his officers had turned Chicago's South Side precinct into their personal ATM machine, extracting cash bail from Latino families who couldn't fight back, who were too afraid to speak up, who watched their sons and brothers disappear into cells and come out broken or not at all. Hidden camera footage flickered across screens. Stacks of bail receipt copies, hastily scribbled on carbon paper. A notebook filled with testimony in Rosa's precise handwriting, names and dates and dollar amounts. Audio files numbered in the hundreds, time-stamped, backed up to 3 separate cloud servers. This wasn't amateur hour. This was a federal case built from the inside by someone who knew exactly what evidence a jury would need to see. But to understand how Rosa Mendez ended up on her knees on that burning pavement with a boot on her back, you have to go back 14 months. Back to when she still believed the system could work. Back to the case that changed everything. 14 months earlier, Rosa sat in her office on the 11th floor of the Cook County Courthouse, the kind of cramped space they gave to junior prosecutors, where the air conditioning rattled and the fluorescent lights buzzed like dying insects. 32 years old, 5 years out of Northwestern law, 3 years in the DA's office. She'd put away gang members, domestic abusers, armed robbers. She believed in the work, believed that the law, applied correctly, was a tool for justice. The file on her desk was thin, too thin for a death. Miguel Mendez, 19 years old, found dead in a holding cell at Southside Precinct. The police report said suicide by hanging. Used his own shirt, tied it to the bar above the toilet, sometime between 2 and 4 in the morning. The medical examiner had signed off. Case closed. Except Rosa knew Miguel. He was her cousin. Not distant family, not someone she saw once a year at Christmas. Miguel was Tia Maria's youngest son, the kid who'd taught himself guitar, who wanted to study music engineering at Columbia College, who called Rosa Prima and asked her about law school because he was thinking maybe he'd apply too, maybe follow in her footsteps. And now he was dead, 19 years old, dead in a cell after being arrested for disorderly conduct at a party that dozens of witnesses said was peaceful until police showed up. Rosa opened the autopsy file. Her hands were steady, professional. She'd seen death before, but this was different. This was Miguel's face in the photographs, gray and lifeless. She forced herself to look at the details. The ligature marks on his neck were wrong, too high, too inconsistent with a hanging. And there were other marks, defensive wounds on his knuckles, a broken index finger on his right hand, bruising on his ribs that suggested blunt force trauma. She flipped to the toxicology report. Clean. No drugs, no alcohol. Miguel didn't even drink. He was asthmatic, had been since childhood. The report noted his inhaler was found in his pocket. unused. Rosa read the police statements. Officer Martinez had done the intake, stated that Miguel was agitated and uncooperative, stated that Miguel had been placed in a holding cell alone, for his own safety and the safety of other detainees, stated that when they checked on him at 4:15 a.m., he was already deceased. No mention of the defensive wounds, no mention of the broken finger, no mention of Miguel begging for his inhaler, which 3 other detainees in adjacent cells had reported hearing. Rosa closed the file and sat in silence. The fluorescent lights buzzed. Traffic hummed 11 stories below. She thought about Miguel teaching her guitar chords when she was in college, patient even when she couldn't get her fingers to cooperate. She thought about his mother, Tia Maria, who'd raised 4 kids alone after her husband died, who'd worked double shifts at the hospital to keep them fed and clothed and dreaming. Rosa picked up the file and walked to her supervisor's office. District Attorney Robert Kellerman was 58, gray-haired with the kind of face that photographed well for campaign posters. He'd been DA for 12 years, respected, connected, the kind of man who played golf with aldermen and had the mayor's personal cell number. "I need to prosecute this case," Rosa said, placing the file on his desk. Kellerman didn't even open it. "The Mendez suicide? That's closed, Rosa." "It's not suicide. The evidence doesn't support it." The medical examiner signed off. The medical examiner missed defensive wounds, missed a broken finger, missed testimony from witnesses who heard him calling for help. Kellerman leaned back in his leather chair, the kind that cost more than Rosa's monthly rent. "Rosa, I understand this is personal. The deceased was your cousin. That's exactly why you shouldn't be anywhere near this case. You're too close. I'm close enough to see that something's wrong. The evidence is insufficient." His tone shifted, became harder. "And frankly, I'm not interested in going after Southside Precinct based on the word of a few detainees with criminal records against sworn police officers. That's not a case we can win." Rosa felt something cold settle in her chest. "Sir, with respect, we haven't even investigated." "The case is closed." Kellerman picked up his phone, a clear dismissal. "I need you focused on the armed robbery trial next week. That's where your energy should be." Rosa walked out of his office. She didn't go back to her own desk. She went to the courthouse bathroom, locked herself in a stall, and cried for the first time since she'd heard about Miguel's death. She cried for him, for Tia Maria, for the system she'd believed in that had just told her some lives mattered less than others. When she was done crying, she washed her face, fixed her makeup, and went back to her office. She made a list. She started with Tia Maria, who gave her the names of other mothers in the neighborhood who'd lost sons in police custody or to police violence. She called them one by one during her lunch breaks and after work. She listened to their stories. There was Anna, whose son Luis had been beaten so badly in a Southside cell that he'd lost vision in his left eye. The officers said he'd resisted arrest. The case went nowhere. There was Carmen, whose nephew Jorge had been held for 72 hours on a $5,000 bail for trespassing when he'd been standing outside his own apartment building. Carmen had to sell her car to pay it. There was Elena, whose brother had been arrested 6 times in 2 years. Always the same pattern. Minor charge, high bail, released without prosecution. Each time cost the family thousands of dollars. 6 families, 6 stories, the same precinct, the same commander, William Drake. Rosa sat in her apartment that night, surrounded by notes, and made a decision. If the system wouldn't give these families justice, she would build a case herself. But she couldn't do it as a prosecutor. Not with Kellerman blocking her, not with official channels closed. She would have to go undercover. She would have to become someone else. Someone Drake and his officers wouldn't see as a threat until it was too late. Rosa opened her laptop and started researching. How to gather evidence covertly. How to build a case outside official channels. How to protect herself while infiltrating one of the most dangerous precincts in Chicago. She had her law degree. She had her training. She had her grief, which had crystallized into something harder and colder than rage. She had 18 months, and she had nothing left to lose except the cousin she'd already lost, the family she'd already failed, the system she'd already stopped believing in. Rosa Mendez was going to war. And Commander William Drake had no idea what was coming for him. She had 18 months to build a case before he realized what she was. 18 months to gather evidence. 18 months to stay alive. The clock started now. Rosa didn't tell anyone at the DA's office what she was planning. Not her colleagues, not her supervisor, certainly not Kellerman. Instead, she called in a favor from the one person she knew would understand. Judge Elena Torres had been on the Cook County bench for 23 years before retiring at 65. She'd presided over more police misconduct cases than anyone in the state, had a reputation for being incorruptible in a city where corruption was currency, and she'd been the one who'd encouraged Rosa to go to law school in the first place, back when Rosa was an undergrad volunteering at legal aid clinics. They met at a cafe in Bridgeport, far enough from the courthouse that no one from the DA's office would see them. Elena arrived early, already seated in the back corner with a cortado and a skeptical expression that Rosa knew well. The judge was small, barely 5'2", with silver hair she wore in a neat bun and eyes that could cut through lies like a scalpel through tissue. "You look terrible," Elena said as Rosa slid into the booth across from her. "I haven't been sleeping." Rosa ordered coffee from the passing waitress, waited until they were alone. "I need your help with something that's probably going to get me fired, maybe arrested, possibly killed." Elena didn't even blink. "Tell me." Rosa laid it out. The pattern of arrests at Southside Precinct, the excessive bail amounts, the deaths in custody that were ruled accidents or suicides despite evidence suggesting otherwise. Miguel's case, Kellerman's refusal to investigate. And then the plan. Rosa would take a sabbatical, claim stress leave, which wouldn't be hard to justify given that her cousin had just died. She'd go undercover as a freelance journalist named Maria Ruiz. She'd interview families, gather testimony, document the pattern, build a case from the outside that couldn't be ignored or buried. Elena listened without interrupting, her face unreadable in that way judges perfected over decades. When Rosa finished, Elena took a long sip of her coffee. "You're risking your career," she finally said. "Maybe your life. You understand that?" "Miguel didn't get a choice," Rosa said quietly. "These families don't get choices. Someone has to give them one." "And you think that someone is you?" It wasn't mockery. It was a genuine question. Rosa met her eyes. "I think I'm the only one who cares enough to try." Elena was silent for a long moment, studying Rosa's face like she was reading a verdict. Then she nodded, just once, decisive. "What do you need from me?" "When this is over, when I have the evidence, I'll need someone to authenticate it. Someone whose credibility can't be questioned. Someone who can stand up in front of cameras and say, 'This is real. This is legitimate. This matters.'" "You'll have it." Elena reached across the table, gripped Rosa's hand. Her fingers were warm despite the iced coffee. "But Rosa, listen to me. These men are dangerous. Drake has been running Southside for 15 years. He has connections all the way to the mayor's office. If he finds out who you really are before you're ready to go public, I'll be careful." Careful might not be enough. Elena released her hand, pulled out her phone. "I know someone at the FBI, Chicago field office. He's been trying to build a case against Southside Precinct for years, but he can't get witnesses to talk. They're too scared. Let me put you in touch with him. At least then you'll have backup if things go sideways." That's how Rosa found herself 3 days later, sitting in a parking garage in the Loop across from FBI Special Agent Marcus Reeves. He was in his early 40s, black, with the kind of quiet intensity that came from years of working cases that went nowhere because the system was designed to protect itself. He'd agreed to meet on Elena's recommendation, but Rosa could tell he was skeptical. "Judge Torres says you're planning to go undercover to investigate Southside Precinct," Reeves said, leaning against his sedan with his arms crossed. "That's either very brave or very stupid." "Probably both," Rosa admitted. She explained the plan again, showed him her preliminary research, the pattern of arrests she'd already documented. Reeves listened, then shook his head slowly. We've been trying to investigate Drake for 5 years. We know he's dirty. We know his officers are shaking down the community. But every time we get close, witnesses disappear. Evidence vanishes. Complaints get buried. Drake has connections all the way to the mayor's office, the superintendent, even some people in the bureau. So you're telling me not to do this? I'm telling you that if you do this, you're going to be alone. I can't give you official bureau support. I can't assign agents to protect you. I can't even acknowledge that we're having this conversation. He paused, met her eyes. But I can give you my personal cell number. I can monitor the situation unofficially. And if you get evidence, real evidence that can't be buried, I can make sure it gets to people who'll actually do something with it. Rosa felt something loosen in her chest. It wasn't much, but it was more than she'd had yesterday. That's enough. Reeves pulled out a business card, wrote a number on the back in pen. This phone is encrypted. If you need me, call this number. And Rosa, he handed her the card. Don't trust anyone at Southside, not the good cops, not the ones who seem sympathetic. Drake owns that precinct. Everyone in it is either corrupt or terrified, sometimes both. 2 weeks later, Rosa Mendez disappeared. She filed for stress leave with the DA's office, citing her cousin's death and burnout from caseload. Kellerman approved it without question, probably relieved to have her out of his hair. She dyed her dark hair lighter, cut it shorter, traded her professional wardrobe for jeans and vintage band t-shirts, rented a small apartment in Pilsen under the name Maria Ruiz, paid cash for 6 months up front using money she'd been saving for a down payment on a condo she'd never buy now. She created a blog, Chicago Unfiltered, Stories from the South Side. Posted articles about gentrification, about immigration, about the gap between what city officials promised and what communities actually received. Built a credible digital footprint as a freelance journalist who cared about the neighborhood, who asked questions, who listened. And then she started interviewing families. Carmen, whose nephew had been arrested 6 times in 2 years. Ana, whose son had lost his eye in Southside custody. Jorge, who'd paid thousands in bail for charges that were never prosecuted. She recorded everything on a tiny digital recorder she kept in her purse, backed up every file to an encrypted cloud drive that FBI agent Reeves had helped her set up. For 2 months, nobody bothered her. Maria Ruiz was just another journalist, another bleeding heart from outside the neighborhood trying to make sense of the chaos. She attended community meetings at the Pilsen Community Center, introduced herself to local activists, made herself visible and harmless, until the night she wasn't harmless anymore. It was 8:15 on a Thursday evening, late February, cold enough that her breath fogged in the air. Rosa had just finished interviewing a family at the community center, a mother whose son had been arrested for loitering while waiting for a bus. The streets were quiet, most people already home for dinner. Rosa walked to her car, a beat-up Honda Civic she'd bought used, parked 2 blocks away under a broken streetlight. She was reaching for her keys when the patrol car pulled up behind her, lights flashing. No siren, just lights, red and blue, painting the gray slush on the sidewalk. 2 officers stepped out. The first was tall, white, mid-30s with a buzz cut and the kind of swagger that came from never being questioned. His nameplate read, Kowalski. The second was shorter, Latino, maybe late 20s, with careful eyes that tracked everything. Martinez. ID, please, Kowalski said. No greeting, no explanation. Rosa kept her hands visible, reached slowly for her wallet. Of course, officer. May I ask what this is about? You match the description of a suspect. Rosa handed over her driver's license, the fake one that said Maria Ruiz. What suspect? Kowalski didn't answer. He took the license back to the patrol car, leaving Martinez standing next to her. Rosa counted seconds. 30, 60, 90. She could see Kowalski in the patrol car talking on his radio, occasionally glancing at her in the rearview mirror. This wasn't about a suspect. This was about sending a message. Martinez shifted his weight, uncomfortable. Rosa looked at him, really looked at him, and saw something in his face. Guilt, maybe, or fear, or both. You're that journalist, Martinez said quietly. not a question. The one asking about police misconduct. Rosa kept her voice calm, neutral. I'm asking questions about the community. That's what journalists do. Maybe you should ask questions somewhere else. It almost sounded like advice, like a warning from someone who knew what happened to people who asked too many questions in the wrong places. 45 minutes later, Kowalski finally returned her ID. He leaned close to her car window, close enough that Rosa could smell coffee and cigarettes on his breath. We'll be watching you, Maria. You understand? Watching you real close. They let her drive away, but Rosa checked her rearview mirror and saw exactly what she'd expected. The patrol car following her, maintaining distance, following her for 3 blocks before finally turning off onto a side street. Rosa's hands were shaking on the steering wheel, not from fear, from adrenaline, from the knowledge that she'd just crossed a threshold. They knew who she was now, what she was doing, which meant the clock had started. How long before they moved from intimidation to something worse? How long before Commander Drake himself took notice? Rosa pulled into her apartment parking lot, sat in the car with the engine running, and made a decision. She pulled out the burner phone Reeves had given her, sent a single text. They know I'm asking questions. Starting timer now. The response came 30 seconds later. Be careful. And Rosa, get everything on tape. She would. Starting tomorrow, every interaction, every interview, every moment would be recorded. Because if they were going to come for her, and they would, she was going to make damn sure the evidence survived, even if she didn't. 6 months into the investigation, Rosa stood outside the Pilsen Community Center with a camera in her hands and a crowd of 200 people at her back. They'd come to protest, to demand answers about the string of deaths in Southside custody. Mothers held poster-sized photographs of their sons. Fathers carried signs reading, "How many more?" and "Justice for our children." The energy was peaceful but determined, the kind of gathering that made politicians nervous. Rosa moved through the crowd with her camera, conducting interviews, gathering testimony. An older woman named Estella showed her a photo of her grandson, dead at 23. They said he hung himself, Estella said, tears streaming. But Diego was getting married next month. He had everything to live for. Rosa was recording Estella's words when she heard the rumble of engines. 3 police vans pulled up, disgorging officers in riot gear, helmets, shields, batons. The crowd tensed but held their ground. Then Commander William Drake stepped out of the lead vehicle. Rosa had seen him from a distance during her investigation, but this was the first time she'd been close enough to study him. 58 years old, silver buzz cut, shoulders still carrying the ramrod posture of his Marine Corps days. 32 years on the force, 15 years running Southside like his personal kingdom. He surveyed the crowd with the casual disdain of a man who'd never been told no. "This assembly is unlawful," Drake announced through a megaphone. "You have 5 minutes to disperse or you will be arrested." The crowd responded with chants. "No justice, no peace! No justice, no peace!" Drake's eyes scanned the protesters and stopped on Rosa, on her camera, on the press credential hanging around her neck that identified her as Maria Ruiz, freelance journalist. "You!" Drake called out, pointing directly at her. "The one with the camera, put it down!" Rosa kept filming. "I have First Amendment rights, Commander. Freedom of press." Drake walked toward her, his officers fanning out behind him. "You're under arrest for inciting a riot." "I'm documenting." Rosa didn't get to finish. 2 officers grabbed her arms. Rosa tried to hold on to her camera, but they wrenched it from her hands. It hit the pavement with a crack, the lens shattering, the screen going dark. The crowd surged forward, angry now, but the riot line held them back with raised shields. "I'm a member of the press!" Rosa shouted as they forced her to the ground, her cheek pressed against the hot concrete. "You can't!" "You're a troublemaker," Drake said, standing over her. He was smiling, actually smiling. "And troublemakers go to jail." Handcuffs bit into Rosa's wrists. They hauled her up, half-dragged her toward the police van. Around her, the crowd was recording on their phones, dozens of cameras capturing her arrest. Rosa caught glimpses of their face shock, Anger, fear. But nobody moved to help. Nobody could. The riot line made sure of that. They threw her into the van like she was cargo. The doors slammed shut. Through the small window, Rosa watched the protest continue, watched Drake order his officers to push the crowd back, watched her camera lying broken on the concrete. This was it, the point of no return. She wasn't an outside observer anymore. She was inside the system now, inside Drake's machine. And she had no idea if she'd survive it. The van lurched forward, carrying her toward Southside Precinct, toward the holding cells where Miguel had died, toward 72 hours that would either make or break her entire investigation. Rosa closed her eyes and thought of her cousin, thought of the promise she'd made at his funeral. Whatever happened next, she wouldn't stop. She couldn't stop. The hashtag would trend briefly that night, Justice for Maria, though Maria Ruiz wasn't her real name. The video would get 20,000 views before being buried in the algorithm. By morning, most people would forget. But Rosa would remember, and so would Drake. They were locked in now, hunter and prey, though neither was entirely sure anymore who was which. The Southside Precinct holding cell smelled like every institutional nightmare Rosa had ever prosecuted. Industrial bleach trying and failing to cover the deeper stench of urine, sweat, and despair. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, that particular frequency designed to make everything look sicker than it was. The concrete bench was cold even through her jeans, and the handcuff chain rattled every time she shifted position, anchored to a metal loop embedded in the wall. Rosa wasn't alone. 4 other women sat on the same bench, all Latina, all arrested at the same protest outside the community center. The youngest couldn't have been more than 22, mascara streaked down her face from crying. The oldest was maybe 50, sitting ramrod straight with the kind of dignity that came from refusing to let them see you break. They'd been there for 3 hours. No phone calls, no lawyers, no explanation beyond processing. Officer Martinez finally entered, carrying a clipboard and wearing an expression Rosa was starting to recognize. The careful blankness of someone who'd learned not to show what they were thinking. He read from the clipboard without meeting anyone's eyes. Bail is set at $5,000 each, cash or certified check. If you can't post bail, you'll be transported to Cook County Jail for Monday arraignment. The young woman next to Rosa sat up straighter. $5,000? For protesting? Her voice cracked on the last word. That's peaceful assembly. That's all right. Martinez kept his eyes on the clipboard. That's the judge's order. Rosa knew there was no judge. It was 10:30 on a Friday night. Bond court didn't convene until morning, and even then, bail for disorderly conduct charges rarely exceeded $500. This wasn't the justice system. This was a shakedown dressed in legal language, and Martinez knew it just as well as she did. Hours crawled past. The fluorescent lights never dimmed. The temperature never changed. Rosa marked time by the sound of footsteps in the hallway, voices she couldn't quite make out, doors opening and closing somewhere deeper in the building. The young woman eventually stopped crying and fell into an exhausted sleep, head resting against the concrete wall. The older woman prayed quietly in Spanish, fingers moving through invisible rosary beads. At 1:15 in the morning, Martinez returned. This time, he didn't bother with the clipboard. He stood in the doorway, hands in his pockets, and spoke in the tone of someone delivering news he'd delivered too many times before. Anyone who can pay $2,000 cash right now can go home tonight. Otherwise, you wait for Monday arraignment. Rosa watched 3 of the women reach for their phones, making frantic calls to family members, to friends, to anyone who might have $2,000 on a Friday night. Within an hour, they were gone. Released without paperwork, without receipts, without any official record that they'd ever been detained. The money changed hands in cash. Martinez counted it in front of them, then walked away without giving them anything in return except their freedom. Only Rosa and the older woman remained. The woman looked at Rosa, something resigned and knowing in her eyes. "You have the money?" she asked in Spanish. Rosa did. She had $3,000 in emergency cash hidden in her apartment, money Elena Torres had insisted she keep for exactly this kind of situation. She could call someone to bring it. She could walk out of here in an hour. But if she did, she'd be just another journalist who paid the fine and ran. She'd be exactly what Drake expected her to be. "No," Rosa said. "I don't have it." The woman studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly, as if Rosa had just passed some kind of test. They sat in silence together, two women who'd both chosen to stay when leaving would have been easier. When Martinez came back to check on them at 2:45, Rosa was ready. She spoke in Spanish, kept her voice low enough that only he would hear. "Esto no es legal." Martinez froze. For the first time since she'd been arrested, he actually looked at her, really looked at her. She saw him clock her professional demeanor, the way she held herself, the fact that she wasn't crying or pleading. He glanced toward the hallway, making sure no one was listening, then moved closer to the bars. "Nada aquí es legal," he whispered back. "Nothing here is legal." His voice carried the weight of every compromise he'd made, every illegal order he'd followed, every family he'd helped extort. "But I got kids to feed, you understand?" Rosa understood. She understood that Officer Martinez was trapped in the same system that killed Miguel, that he'd probably started with good intentions and ended up here, taking cash from terrified mothers at 2 in the morning because the alternative was losing his job, his pension, his ability to provide for his family. She understood, and she still couldn't forgive him. Martinez walked away without waiting for her response. His footsteps echoed down the hallway, growing fainter until they disappeared entirely. At 3:17 in the morning, Rosa was finally alone. The older woman had been moved to a different cell for reasons no one bothered to explain. Rosa sat on the concrete bench and checked her hidden tech with the careful movements of someone who'd practiced this exact scenario 100 times. The smartwatch on her left wrist looked standard, the kind athletes wore to track their steps. But embedded in its housing was a GPS tracker transmitting her location every 30 seconds to a secure server monitored by FBI agent Marcus Reeves. If she didn't check in by morning, if the signal went dark, if her biometrics indicated distress, Reeves would know. He couldn't officially help her, but he'd know where to send the cavalry if things went truly sideways. The second piece of tech was sewn into her bra strap, so small she barely felt it anymore. A voice-activated recorder, no bigger than a thumbnail, uploading every conversation to an encrypted cloud drive. Every word Drake had said when he arrested her, every word Martinez had just whispered in Spanish. Every illegal order, every admission, every piece of evidence that would someday sit in front of a jury. Rosa leaned back against the concrete wall and whispered into the darkness, knowing the recorder would catch every word. June 14th, 3:17 a.m. Officer Martinez confirmed the bail extortion is standard practice. 4 women paid $2,000 cash each. No receipts were given. No official record of payment. This is systematic theft from the Latino community, sanctioned by Commander Drake and executed by his officers. Her voice was steady, professional, the same tone she used when presenting evidence in court. But underneath it, she was exhausted. The adrenaline from the arrest had burned off hours ago, leaving behind bone-deep fatigue and the beginning of a headache from the fluorescent lights. She closed her eyes for just a moment, and Miguel's face appeared behind her eyelids. She remembered his funeral, the church so full that people stood in the aisles, spilled out onto the steps. Tia Maria sitting in the front pew, her face carved from stone, too devastated for tears. The closed casket because the autopsy had been too thorough, the medical examiner too invasive. Rosa had stood at the podium to deliver the eulogy and had looked out at all those faces, all those families who'd lost sons and brothers and fathers to the same system, and she'd made a promise. "I'll find out what happened," she'd told Tia Maria after the service, holding her aunt's hands in hers. "I'll make them answer for it. I promise you." Rosa opened her eyes in the holding cell, alone in the fluorescent glare, and renewed that promise silently. She would get the evidence. She would build the case. She would make them answer for Miguel and for every other family Drake had destroyed. She just had to survive long enough to do it. Morning came without sunrise, just a gradual awareness that the quality of the hallway noise had changed. Footsteps were heavier, more frequent, voices louder. Day shift arriving. Rosa stood when she heard the approaching footsteps, instinctively straightening her clothes, her posture. Prosecutor mode, even in a jail cell. Commander William Drake entered the holding area like he owned it, which in every way that mattered, he did. 58 years old, silver buzz cut, shoulders that still carried the military bearing from 20 years in the Marines before he joined Chicago PD. He carried a manila folder in one hand and wore an expression Rosa had seen on 100 defendants just before they thought they'd won. "Maria Ruiz," Drake said, drawing out the fake name like he was tasting it, finding it wanting. "You've been busy." He opened the folder, pulled out printed pages. Rosa recognized her own blog posts, her own words. "You write that I'm running a protection racket, that I'm extorting the community. That's defamation, Maria. That's a crime." Rosa kept her voice calm, her hands visible. "It's investigative journalism. First Amendment protections apply." Drake smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "You're not a real journalist. You're a con artist, a troublemaker, the kind of person who comes into other people's neighborhoods and causes problems." This was it. The moment Rosa had been preparing for since she'd gone undercover 6 months ago. She could keep playing the role, keep pretending to be Maria Ruiz, keep gathering evidence slowly and carefully. Or she could end the charade right now, reveal who she really was, and force Drake's hand. Rosa bent down and removed her left shoe. She peeled back the insole carefully, extracted the thin, laminated card she'd hidden there the day she went undercover. She held it up between 2 fingers, let Drake see it clearly. "I'm Assistant District Attorney Rosa Mendez, Cook County Prosecutor's Office, badge number 4782. Her voice was level, professional, the voice she used in court when presenting opening arguments. "This is an official investigation into corruption under Illinois Criminal Code Section 5-33B. You are currently in violation of multiple statutes, including extortion, false imprisonment, and—" Drake laughed. He actually threw his head back and laughed, the sound echoing off the concrete walls. "Boys!" he shouted toward the hallway. "Boys, get in here! You gotta hear this!" Officer Kowalski appeared first, then Martinez, then 2 other officers Rosa hadn't seen before. They crowded around the holding cell, curious, amused. Drake held up Rosa's badge like it was a prop in a comedy show. "She says she's a district attorney." Drake turned the badge over in his hands, examining it with exaggerated care. "From Cook County. Says she's investigating me." He looked at his officers. "What do you think? Does this look real to you?" Kowalski moved closer, squinting at the badge. "Looks fake to me, Commander. I've seen better ones at Halloween stores." Drake handed the badge to Martinez. "What about you, Martinez? You're the detail guy. This look official?" Martinez took the badge, and for just a second, Rosa saw uncertainty flicker across his face. He'd seen real DA badges before. He knew what they looked like. But he also knew what Drake expected him to say. "It's a fake," Martinez said quietly, handing it back to Drake. Kowalski pulled out his phone, started recording. "Say it again," he told Rosa, grinning. "Tell us you're a DA. This is going to be great." Rosa met the camera directly, kept her voice absolutely steady. "I am Assistant District Attorney Rosa Mendez, Cook County Prosecutor's Office, badge number 4782. Call the Cook County DA's office. Ask for ADA Rosa Mendez. Verify my badge number. This is an official investigation." Drake pocketed her badge. "Oh, I'll call, absolutely. I'll call right now." He pulled out his phone, made a show of looking up the number. "But first, you're staying here for 72 hours. Plenty of time to check your little story. Plenty of time for you to think about what happens to people who lie to police officers." He walked away, his officers following, their laughter fading down the hallway. Rosa was alone again. She sat back down on the concrete bench and waited. She'd just crossed the point of no return. Drake had her badge. He was calling the DA's office. and Rosa had absolutely no idea if they would confirm her identity or hang her out to dry. Either way, she'd recorded every word, and the evidence was already in the cloud, already backed up, already beyond Drake's reach. Now she just had to survive the next 72 hours. Drake returned 2 hours later with his phone in hand and a smile that made Rosa's stomach turn. He didn't enter the cell, just stood outside the bars, made a show of scrolling through his contacts, finding the number he needed. He hit dial and turned on the speaker. "Let's clear this up right now," Drake said, loud enough for the other officers gathering in the hallway to hear. This was theater. Public humiliation designed to break her. The phone rang twice. Then a professional female voice. "Cook County District Attorney's Office, how may I direct your call?" "Yeah, hi." Drake leaned against the wall, casual, confident. "I need to verify the employment of one of your ADAs, Rosa Mendez." "One moment, please." Hold music. Tinny classical guitar that sounded like it was being played underwater. Rosa counted seconds. 15. 20. She knew what was coming. She'd known the moment Drake said he'd call. But knowing didn't make it hurt less. The voice returned. "I'm sorry, sir. We have no one by that name currently employed with this office." Drake's smile widened. "You sure about that? She's claiming to be an assistant district attorney, badge number 4782. A pause. Rosa could hear keyboard clicking through the speaker. "No, sir. That badge number is not in our active registry. Is there anything else I can help you with?" "No, ma'am. That's all I needed. You've been very helpful." Drake ended the call, pocketed his phone. He looked at Rosa through the bars with something close to pity, like she was a child who'd been caught in an obvious lie. Fake badge, fake credentials. That's impersonating a government official, Maria. Or Rosa, or whatever your real name is. That's a felony in Illinois, 3 to 7 years. Kowalski let out a low whistle. Damn. She really committed to the bit. Rosa kept her face absolutely neutral, but her mind was racing. She was on stress leave, officially inactive. The DA's office could claim she wasn't currently employed without technically lying. But the badge number? That was permanent, tied to her personnel file. For them to deny the badge number meant someone had scrubbed her from the active database. Someone high enough to access personnel records. Someone who wanted to make absolutely sure that if she claimed to be a prosecutor, no one would believe her. Robert Kellerman, her own boss. The man who'd refused to investigate Miguel's death. The man who'd told her the case was closed, insufficient evidence, not worth pursuing. He wasn't just blocking her investigation, he was actively protecting Drake. The realization hit Rosa like cold water. The corruption didn't stop at Southside Precinct. It ran through the DA's office, through the very institution she'd spent 5 years serving, believing in, trusting to deliver justice. Drake was watching her face, reading her reaction. "You're starting to understand, aren't you? There's no cavalry coming. There's no one to save you. You're alone." Rosa met his eyes. "We'll see." She said it quietly, but Drake heard the steel underneath. His smile faded slightly. Then he shrugged. 72 hours. Think about your next move carefully." He walked away, and this time Rosa was truly alone with the knowledge that everyone who should have had her back had turned away. 12 hours later, they moved Rosa to general population. A larger cell, still concrete and fluorescent lights, but with 6 other women instead of the isolation of holding. All Latina. All arrested for minor offenses that somehow warranted thousands in bail. All waiting for Monday arraignment that might or might not actually happen. Rosa sat on the bench farthest from the door and observed. This was evidence walking and breathing around her. Every woman here was a victim of Drake's system. Every story was another piece of the pattern. The woman next to her was in her early 40s, stocky and tired-looking, with cleaning chemicals still staining her work shirt. She caught Rosa looking and offered a sad smile. "First time?" "Yeah," Rosa said. "You?" "Third time this year." The woman extended her hand. "Carmen Flores." Rosa shook it. "Maria Ruiz." "What'd they get you for?" "Protesting. Disorderly conduct." "You?" Carmen laughed, bitter. Trespassing. At my own job. I clean offices downtown. My boss decided he didn't want to pay me for last month, so he called the cops, said I was trespassing. They arrested me at work in front of everyone. Rosa felt anger tighten in her chest. How much was bail? $3,000. I paid it because I got kids at home. My sister's watching them, but she works nights. I had to get out. Carmen looked down at her hands. That was money for rent. Now I don't know how we're going to make it. Rosa pulled out the mental notepad she'd been keeping since she went undercover. Carmen Flores, arrested for trespassing, $3,000 bail, money meant for rent. She'd add it to the recorder later when she was alone. Another woman approached, older, maybe late 50s, with gray streaking through her black hair and a photograph clutched in her hand. You're the journalist, aren't you? Maria Ruiz? I read your blog. Rosa's cover identity. It felt strange to be recognized for it now after Drake had tried to strip it away. Yeah, that's me. My name is Ana Reyes. The woman held out the photograph. A young man, maybe 19, in a high school graduation cap and gown. Bright smile, whole life ahead of him. This is my son, Luis. He died here 2 months ago. They said it was a pre-existing condition, but he was healthy. He ran track. He never had nothing wrong with his heart. Rosa took the photograph carefully, like it was sacred, because it was. What happened? They arrested him for resisting arrest, but he wasn't resisting. He was just scared. They put him in a cell, and the next morning they called me to say he was dead. Heart failure, they said. Anna's voice cracked. But when I saw him at the morgue, he had bruises on his ribs, on his back, like someone had beat him. Rosa recorded every word in her memory. Luis Reyes, 19 years old, died in custody. Official cause, heart failure. Actual cause, likely blunt force trauma. Mother never got answers. Another Miguel, another family destroyed. I'm so sorry, Rosa said, and meant it with everything she had. A third woman joined them, younger, maybe late 20s, with a construction company logo on her t-shirt. Jorge Martinez, she introduced herself, then caught Rosa's confusion. Yeah, I know. Martinez is a guy's name. My dad wanted a son. Got me instead. She smiled, but it was fragile. They got me for public intoxication. I was walking home from work at 6 p.m., stone sober. Hadn't had a drink in 3 years. But they pulled me over, said I looked drunk, arrested me anyway. How much did you pay? Rosa asked. $2,500. Everything I had saved for my daughter's quinceañera. Jorge's hands clenched into fists. They beat me in the cell. Said I was resisting. I wasn't. I was just trying to protect my face. Rosa looked at these 3 women, at the other women in the cell, and saw Miguel in every face. Saw Tia Maria's grief multiplied across a community. This wasn't just corruption. This was systematic destruction of families, of futures, of hope. Carmen was watching Rosa's face. You're really taking this in, aren't you? Most journalists, they ask questions. They write their article. They leave. You look like you actually care. I do care, Rosa said. Then, because these women deserved honesty, because she was tired of the lie, my cousin died here, 6 months ago. Miguel Mendez. They said it was suicide. The cell went quiet. Anna was the first to speak. Miguel Mendez. I knew him. He was friends with my Luis. They ran track together. Carmen nodded slowly. I remember when he died. The whole neighborhood was talking about it. Good kid, never caused trouble. Jorge reached out and gripped Rosa's shoulder. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Rosa felt tears threaten and forced them back. Not here, not now. I'm here to make sure no one else dies like Miguel did, like Luis did. But I need your help. I need you to trust me. Carmen studied her face for a long moment. Why should we? You could be working for them. You could be collecting names so they know who to go after next. It was a fair question, a smart question. These women had learned not to trust easily because trust got you hurt in Drake's Chicago. Rosa made a decision. She reached into her bra strap, felt for the tiny recorder, pulled it out. It was smaller than a thumb drive, looked like a button. She showed it to them. I've been recording everything. Every illegal bail demand, every threat, every admission. This all goes to the FBI, to journalists who can't be bought. When this is over, when Drake and his officers are arrested, your testimonies will be part of the evidence that puts them away. The women stared at the recorder, then at Rosa. Carmen spoke first. You're not really a journalist, are you? No, Rosa said quietly. I'm a prosecutor. I'm here because the system failed Miguel, failed all of us, and I'm going to make it right. Anna took Rosa's hand, squeezed it.
Then we'll help you.
Whatever you need. 72 hours after her arrest, Rosa was released. No charges filed, no paperwork, no record that she'd ever been detained. It was like she'd never existed in the system, which was exactly how Drake wanted it. She walked through the precinct toward the exit, collecting her belongings from the property desk. Her camera was destroyed, screen shattered, memory card missing. Her notebook was lost. Her phone had been accidentally dropped, broken beyond repair. Everything obvious, everything they could see, was gone. But the recorder in her bra strap was intact. The smartwatch on her wrist still transmitted. Everything that mattered had survived. Rosa was almost to the door when Drake appeared from his office. Maria, Rosa, whoever you are, hold up. They were alone in the hallway. No witnesses, no cameras. Drake positioned himself between Rosa and the exit.
Here's what's going to happen,
he said, his voice low and conversational, like he was giving friendly advice. You're going to leave Chicago, today. You're going to stop writing your little blog posts, stop asking questions, stop pretending you're some kind of hero. Rosa said nothing, just watched him. If you file complaints, I have statements from 4 officers saying you assaulted them during your arrest. I have video of you confessing to being a fake DA. I have a DA's office that says you don't work there. He stepped closer. And if you don't leave, next time you won't walk out of here. You'll be carried out. In a bag. He paused, let that sink in, then added, almost as an afterthought, like your cousin. Rosa felt everything inside her go cold and still. You knew Miguel. Drake smiled. I know all of them. Miguel, Luis, Jorge, Carmen's boss who didn't want to pay her. I know everyone in this neighborhood. And they all made the same mistake. He leaned in close enough that Rosa could smell his coffee breath. They thought someone would care. They thought if they complained loud enough, long enough, someone would listen, someone would help. His smile widened. No one cares, Rosa. This is my city, my precinct, my rules. The mayor knows. The DA knows. The cops know. Everyone who matters knows exactly what I do here, and they let me do it because I keep the crime stats down, and I keep the donations flowing, and I keep the right people happy. He straightened up, brushed imaginary dust off his uniform. So take my advice. Leave Chicago. Start over somewhere else. Forget about Miguel. Forget about justice, because you're not going to find it here. Drake walked away, back to his office, leaving Rosa standing alone in the hallway. She walked out of Southside Precinct into the late afternoon sun. The air smelled like rain coming, that particular Chicago smell of lake water and concrete. Her hands were shaking, not from fear, but from rage so pure it felt like electricity in her veins. Drake had just confessed, on tape, everything she needed, his knowledge of Miguel, his admission that the system protected him, his direct threat to kill her if she didn't leave. Rosa pulled out the burner phone FBI agent Reeves had given her. Her fingers were steady now. She typed a single message. I have his confession. He admitted Miguel. He threatened to kill me. It's all recorded. The response came within seconds. Get somewhere safe, now. Rosa looked back at the precinct building, at Drake's window on the second floor. She could see his silhouette, watching her leave, probably thinking he'd won. He had no idea what was coming for him. Rosa started walking. She had evidence. She had witnesses. She had Drake's own words condemning him. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. Text message. We know where you sleep. Rosa's hands tightened on her steering wheel. They weren't done with her yet. Not even close. Rosa's undercover apartment in Pilsen was a third-floor walk-up that smelled like the tamale shop downstairs and had bars on the windows. She locked the door behind her, checked the windows, pulled the curtains closed. Only then did she allow herself to breathe. Her hands were still shaking from Drake's threat. "You'll be carried out in a bag, like your cousin." She could hear his voice in her head, casual and certain, the voice of a man who'd made that threat before and followed through. Rosa sat at the small kitchen table, opened her laptop, and got to work. This was what she knew how to do: evidence, analysis, building cases from fragments into something undeniable. She downloaded all the audio files from her hidden recorder, backed them up to 3 separate encrypted cloud drives that FBI agent Reeves had set up for her. Then she started organizing. 47 arrests over 18 months. She documented every single one, starting from her second week undercover. Names, dates, alleged charges, bail amounts. She built a spreadsheet, color-coded by type of offense: disorderly conduct, trespassing, public intoxication, resisting arrest. None of them serious, all of them pretexts. The pattern was obvious once you laid it out visually. Every single arrestee was Latino. Every single one was released without formal charges after paying bail. The bail amounts varied, but they averaged around $3,800. 47 people times $3,800. Rosa did the math. Approximately $180,000 collected in 18 months. And that was just what she documented. Drake had been running Southside for 15 years. The question was, where did the money go? Rosa pulled up the Chicago Public Records database, started searching. Police department budgets were public information, buried in hundreds of pages of line items and bureaucratic language designed to make your eyes glaze over. But Rosa had spent 5 years as a prosecutor reading financial documents. She knew what to look for. There, buried in the Southside Precinct budget under Community Outreach Initiatives, was a recurring line item: quarterly payments to Southside Security Consulting, LLC. $20,000 per quarter, $80,000 per year. The payments had been going on for 12 years. Rosa searched the Illinois Secretary of State Business Registry. Southside Security Consulting, LLC, registered 2011. Owner and CEO, Thomas Drake. Drake. She searched the name against William Drake's public records. Thomas Drake was listed as William Drake's brother-in-law, married to his sister Jennifer. A shell company. Precinct funds funneled to Drake's family. $80,000 a year in official payments, plus however much was collected in illegal bail that never showed up on any books. The entire operation, hidden in plain sight, documented in public records that no one bothered to read. But that didn't explain why D.A. Kellerman had denied her badge. Didn't explain why the DA's office had thrown her to the wolves. Rosa opened a new search: campaign finance records. Every donation over $1,000 was public record in Illinois. She pulled up Robert Kellerman's last election campaign from 2 years ago, scrolled through the donor list: individual contributions, PAC contributions, union endorsements. And there it was: Southside Security Consulting, LLC. $50,000 donated to the Kellerman re-election campaign, the maximum allowed under Illinois law. Rosa sat back in her chair, feeling sick. Kellerman wasn't just protecting Drake out of institutional loyalty or bureaucratic cowardice. He was on Drake's payroll. The DA, who was supposed to prosecute corruption, was taking money from the corrupt. The system wasn't broken. It was working exactly as designed, just not for the people it was supposed to serve. She needed to go public. The official channels were closed. The DA's office was compromised. The police department was the problem. She couldn't trust the system to police itself. Rosa picked up her burner phone, called the only person she knew was clean. Judge Elena Torres answered on the second ring. "Rosa, are you safe?" "For now. But Elena, I need your help. I need to go public with this. I can't use official channels. The DA's office is compromised." A pause, then, "What do you need?" "A journalist, a real one, someone who can't be bought or intimidated. Someone with a platform big enough that the story can't be buried. Elena was quiet for a moment, thinking. Marcus Hill, Chicago Tribune. He's been covering police corruption for 20 years, won a Pulitzer for his series on CPD black sites. If anyone will take this seriously and protect you while doing it, it's him. Can you make an introduction? I'll call him tonight. But Rosa, once you go public, there's no going back. Drake will know you're coming for him. He'll escalate. He already threatened to kill me. How much more can he escalate? You'd be surprised what desperate men are capable of. Elena's voice was heavy with something that sounded like experience. Be careful. I'll call you when Hill agrees to meet. Rosa ended the call and sat in the dark apartment, listening to the sounds of the city outside. Sirens in the distance, music from the bar down the street. Normal life continuing while she sat here holding evidence of murder and conspiracy. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. Text message. I can help, but not here. Rosa stared at the message. Could be a trap. Could be Drake setting her up. Could be anything. But she'd come this far by taking calculated risks. She texted back, "Who is this?" "Someone who's tired of lying. Parking garage on Ashland. Level 3, 2 a.m. Come alone." It was either genuine or the stupidest trap in history. Rosa checked her watch. 11:47. 2 hours to decide if she was walking into an ambush. She decided yes, because if there was even a chance someone inside Drake's organization wanted to help, she had to take it. Rosa arrived at the parking garage at 1:55. Level 3 was nearly empty, just a few cars scattered across the concrete expanse. Fluorescent lights cast everything in harsh shadows. She parked in a corner with clear sight lines to the exits, kept her engine running, doors locked. At exactly 2 a.m., a sedan pulled up beside her. Rosa recognized it, Officer Martinez's personal vehicle. Martinez stepped out slowly, hands visible, looking around like he expected snipers. He approached Rosa's window, gestured for her to roll it down. She did, just halfway. "You came," Martinez said. He looked terrible, exhausted, scared, like a man who hadn't slept in days. "You said you could help." Martinez glanced around again, then leaned closer. "Drake knows you're still investigating. He's planning something. I don't know what, but he had a meeting with his guys. Private. Told us all to leave the precinct. Whatever he's planning, it's not official." Rosa felt ice in her stomach. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I'm tired," Martinez's voice cracked. "I'm tired of looking at mothers crying when I tell them their kids are dead. Tired of lying in reports. Tired of being part of this." He pulled a USB drive from his pocket, held it through the window. "Body cam footage from your cousin Miguel's cell and 6 others who died in custody over the past 3 years. Rosa took the drive with shaking hands. "Why didn't you come forward before?" "Because I have a family, a wife, 2 kids. Drake threatened them, showed me photos of my daughter at school, my son at soccer practice. Said if I ever talked, if I ever went against him, he has connections with ICE. Said he'd find problems with my wife's immigration paperwork. Said my kids would watch their mother get deported." Rosa understood. Of course she did. Drake weaponized everything. Family, fear, the immigration system. He found whatever mattered most to you and held it hostage. "I can protect you," Rosa said. "Federal witness protection, new identities, new city, your whole family, safe." Martinez shook his head. "I'm not testifying, I can't. But you can use this footage. Just don't tell anyone it came from me, please." "Martinez, promise me." His voice was desperate. "Promise you won't say where you got this." Rosa looked at his face, saw the same fear she'd seen in Carmen and Ana and Jorge. Saw a man trapped by a system he'd helped build, trying to do one decent thing before it crushed him completely. "I promise." Martinez nodded once, then walked quickly back to his car. He was gone before Rosa could say anything else, taillights disappearing down the ramp. Rosa sat alone in the parking garage, holding the USB drive. Evidence that could destroy Drake. Visual proof. Body camera footage that would show exactly what happened to Miguel and 6 others. She drove home, parked, ran up the 3 flights of stairs to her apartment, locked the door, pulled the curtains, plugged the USB drive into her laptop with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. 7 video files, each labeled with a date and a name. She found Miguel's file, clicked play. The footage started with the timestamp, 01:47 minutes 23 seconds. Early morning 6 months ago. The camera was on a guard's chest, POV showing a hallway of holding cells. The guard approached cell 7. Inside, Rosa could see Miguel, her primo, 19 years old, alive. Miguel was sitting on the concrete bench, hunched over, breathing hard. Even through the grainy footage, Rosa could see he was in distress. He looked up at the guard, and Rosa saw his face clearly for the first time since his funeral. Young, scared, desperate. "I can't breathe," Miguel said, his voice tight. "I need my inhaler. Please, I can't breathe." The guard looked at him for a moment, then walked away. The camera moved down the hallway, showing the guard going back to his desk. Miguel's voice followed him, getting more panicked. "Please, I need my inhaler. I have asthma, please." The guard sat down, picked up his phone, started scrolling. 12 minutes passed, according to the timestamp. Rosa could hear Miguel in the background, his breathing becoming more labored, more desperate. Then a crash, the sound of a body hitting concrete. The guard stood up, walked back to the cell. The camera showed Miguel on the floor, collapsed, his chest barely moving. His lips were already turning blue. The guard didn't open the cell, didn't call for medical help. Instead, he pulled out his phone, made a call. "Commander? Yeah, it's Hayes. I got a situation with the Mendez kid. He's on the floor. Looks bad." A pause. Then the guard nodded. "Yes, sir. I'll wait." The guard stood outside the cell watching Miguel die and did nothing. 8 minutes passed. 9. 10. Miguel stopped moving entirely, stopped breathing. Finally, footsteps. Commander Drake entered the frame, looked into the cell at Miguel's body. "He's faking," Drake said, his voice clear on the audio. "Leave him. He'll get up when he realizes we're not playing his game." "Sir, he's been down for almost 10 minutes. He's not moving." "I said leave him." The guard hesitated, then followed Drake away from the cell. The camera stayed on Miguel's body, motionless on the concrete floor. The timestamp continued. 20 minutes. 25. 30. When they finally returned, Drake looked into the cell and cursed. "Shit! Check his pulse." The guard opened the cell, knelt beside Miguel, pressed fingers to his neck, shook his head. Drake was quiet for a long moment, then, "This never happened. You understand me? This never happened. He hung himself, overnight. We found him at morning check." "Sir, the body cam is going to show that we checked on him at 2 a.m. and he was fine. Then we checked again at 6 and found him dead. Suicide. Tragic. We did everything we could." Drake looked directly at the camera. "Turn that off. Now." The footage ended. Rosa sat in the dark, tears streaming down her face. She'd known Miguel was murdered. She'd suspected Drake was responsible. But seeing it, watching her cousin beg for help, watching him die while guards did nothing, watching Drake order the cover-up like he was ordering coffee, she wasn't crying anymore. She was shaking with rage so pure it felt like it would tear her apart from the inside. Rosa opened the other 6 files, watched 6 more people die in Southside cells while guards ignored them, while Drake covered it up, while the system that was supposed to protect people murdered them instead. Luis Reyes, beaten to death. Drake told the guards to say it was a heart attack. Sofia Martinez, denied her diabetes medication. Drake said she was drug-seeking. 3 others Rosa didn't know, all dead, all covered up, all attributed to suicide or pre-existing conditions or accidents. 7 murders, all documented, all on camera, all ordered or condoned by Commander William Drake. Rosa wiped her eyes, steadied her breathing, and got to work. She uploaded the footage to the encrypted cloud drives, sent copies to FBI agent Reeves with the subject line, "Body cam footage from 7 in-custody deaths. Drake ordered cover-ups. All murders." She sent copies to Judge Elena Torres. This is how they killed Miguel
and 6 others.
She sent copies to Marcus Hill at the Chicago Tribune. Body cam evidence of police murders at Southside Precinct. I have testimony from 47 victims of extortion. I have financial records showing money laundering through shell companies. I have audio of death threats from Commander Drake. I'm ready to go public. Are you ready to publish? Rosa closed her laptop and sat in the silence of her apartment. She had everything now: video evidence, audio confessions, financial records, witness testimony. Everything a prosecutor would need to bring charges. Everything a jury would need to convict. But she wasn't a prosecutor anymore. Not officially. Not in a system where the DA took bribes from the man she was trying to prosecute. She was something else now. Something more dangerous than a prosecutor with a badge. She was a witness who refused to stay silent. A victim who'd gathered her own evidence. A woman with nothing left to lose and everything to prove. Rosa looked at the photo of Miguel she kept on her desk, the one from his high school graduation. Young and smiling and full of dreams that Drake had extinguished like they were nothing. "I kept my promise, Primo," Rosa whispered. "I found out what happened, and now everyone else is going to know too." Her phone buzzed. Text from Marcus Hill. "I've seen the footage. Meet me tomorrow, 10 a.m., Tribune offices. We're publishing this. All of it." Rosa allowed herself the smallest smile. The evidence was out. The story was going public. Drake's empire was about to fall. Then a second text arrived. Unknown number. "Cancel the press conference or you die. We know where you are. Final warning." Rosa's smile faded. She had the evidence, but Drake had one last move, and she had 12 hours to survive it. 3 days of preparation. Marcus Hill from the Chicago Tribune had moved fast once he'd seen the body cam footage. He'd called the press club, secured the main conference room for Friday morning at 10. CNN was sending a crew. Local affiliates had confirmed. Independent journalists were coming. The room held 50 people, and Hill expected it to be standing room only. Rosa spent those 3 days preparing her testimony, organizing evidence into USB drives, each one containing the complete case: audio recordings, body cam footage, financial records, witness statements. She had 6 drives ready, each one a complete backup. Even if Drake tried to destroy the evidence at the press conference, copies existed in 3 separate cloud servers, with the FBI, with Judge Torres, with Marcus Hill's editor. The case was airtight. By Friday at noon, the whole country would know what Commander William Drake had done. By Friday evening, arrest warrants would be issued. By next week, Drake would be in federal custody awaiting trial for 7 counts of murder. Rosa allowed herself to believe it, all herself to imagine standing in front of those cameras, showing Miguel's footage, watching Drake's empire collapse in real time. Justice. Finally. Thursday night at 11:14, her laptop pinged with a new email. Anonymous sender, routed through multiple proxies. Subject line: Final warning. She opened it. "Cancel the press conference or you die. We know where you are. We know you're at Judge Torres's house in Evanston. We know what car you're driving. We know the route you're planning to take tomorrow morning. Cancel it or you disappear. This is not a threat. This is a promise." Rosa's blood went cold. She was at Elena's house. She hadn't told anyone except Marcus Hill and FBI agent Reeves, which meant Drake had sources she didn't know about, surveillance she hadn't detected, or someone close to her investigation had talked. She called Reeves immediately. "They know where I am. They know my route tomorrow." "Change the route. I'll send a protection detail." "No! If they see FBI protection, they'll know I'm official. That plays into their narrative that I'm lying about being thrown away by the DA's office." Rosa thought fast. "I'll leave earlier. Take a different route. Get to the Tribune offices before dawn. Stay there until the press conference." "Rosa, if they're threatening to kill you..." "They've been threatening to kill me for 6 months. This is just the end game." She tried to sound more confident than she felt. "I'll be careful. I'll check in every 30 minutes. She hung up before Reeves could argue further. Looked at the email again. They wanted her scared. They wanted her to cancel, which meant the press conference was the right move. Rosa closed her laptop and turned on the TV to check the news before bed. WGN was running their 11 o'clock broadcast. The anchor's voice was serious, concerned. In local news, disturbing allegations tonight about a former Cook County prosecutor who has been impersonating a district attorney and harassing Chicago police officers. Rosa's stomach dropped. Footage of her appeared on screen, her official DA headshot from 2 years ago. Then the anchor continued. Rosa Mendez, who left the DA's office 6 months ago on psychiatric leave, has been operating under false credentials, claiming to still be an assistant district attorney while conducting what sources describe as a harassment campaign against officers at Southside Precinct. Cut to DA Robert Kellerman, standing in front of cameras at a hastily arranged press conference. He looked somber, concerned, the picture of responsible authority. Ms. Mendez is troubled, Kellerman said, his voice heavy with false compassion. She experienced a family tragedy and took leave from our office for her mental health. We've been monitoring the situation with concern. She has made several false accusations against law enforcement. We hope she gets the help she needs. The anchor returned. Sources say Mendez has been using a fake badge and fabricated credentials. Police are considering charges of impersonation and harassment. Rosa grabbed her phone. Twitter was exploding. #FakeDA was trending. Bot accounts, hundreds of them, all posting the same talking points. She's a liar, mentally unstable. Another fake victim playing the race card. The coordinated campaign was obvious if you knew what to look for, but most people wouldn't look that closely. Her phone rang. Marcus Hill. Rosa, have you seen? I'm watching it now. My legal team is nervous. They're talking about defamation risk. If you're not officially a DA anymore, if your credentials have been revoked. I have video evidence, Marcus. Body cam footage of 7 murders. Audio of Drake threatening to kill me. Financial records showing money laundering. This isn't about my credentials. This is about stopping them before I can go public. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then we show everything tomorrow. The footage speaks for itself. We don't let them control the narrative. A pause. But Rosa, be careful. They're desperate. Desperate people do desperate things. Rosa barely slept. She left Elena's house at 5:30 in the morning, 90 minutes earlier than planned. Took Highway 90 instead of the Lakeshore Drive route they'd been expecting. Traffic was light. Morning commuters just starting to fill the roads. Rosa kept checking her mirrors, watching for tails, seeing nothing suspicious. The sun was just starting to rise over Lake Michigan, painting the sky in streaks of orange and pink. Rosa was 90 minutes from the press conference, 90 minutes from ending Drake's reign, 90 minutes from justice for Miguel. That's when the unmarked car appeared. No plates, dark sedan. It pulled alongside her in the left lane, matching her speed exactly. Rosa glanced over, saw the driver. Kowalski. In civilian clothes, not uniform. Her stomach clenched. Before she could react, the sedan swerved hard into her lane, forcing her right. Rosa hit the brakes, but another car appeared behind her, boxing her in. They forced her off the highway onto an exit ramp, then onto a side road that dead-ended in a construction zone. Chain-link fence, abandoned equipment, no witnesses. Rosa grabbed her phone to call for help, but her door was yanked open. Hands grabbed her, pulled her from the car. 3 men, Drake in civilian clothes, Kowalski, and a third man Rosa didn't recognize. Big, tattooed, clearly not police. Hired muscle. "This is kidnapping!" Rosa shouted, trying to pull away. "I have GPS tracking. The FBI knows exactly where—" "We know," Drake said calmly. He held up her phone, the screen shattered. "Disabled 20 minutes ago. Remote access. You really think we didn't know about your FBI boyfriend?" He threw the phone on the ground, crushed it under his boot. They zip-tied her hands in front of her, pulled a hood over her head. Rosa fought, but the hired muscle was too strong. She was shoved into a vehicle, heard doors slam, felt movement. They were driving. The hood came off maybe 20 minutes later. Rosa blinked in the sudden light. She was in a warehouse, massive and empty, the kind that used to house manufacturing equipment before the jobs moved overseas. High ceilings, broken windows, concrete floor stained with oil and rust. The morning sun came through the windows in dusty shafts of light. Drake stood in front of her holding a piece of paper. "Last chance, Rosa. Sign this confession. You fabricated evidence. You're mentally ill. You apologize to me and my officers for the harassment. You leave Chicago and never come back." Rosa looked at him, at Kowalski standing nervously to the side, at the hired muscle who was pulling a gun from his waistband. This was it. This was how it ended if she didn't sign. Not in court, not with justice. Just her body in the Calumet River, another unsolved disappearance in a city full of them. "Or what?" Rosa said. Her voice was steadier than she felt. "You're going to murder a prosecutor?" Drake smiled. "You're not a prosecutor. Your own DA's office said so. You're a delusional woman who's been harassing police officers. Everyone knows it now. We've made sure of that." He stepped closer. "You disappear into that river and no one will be surprised. No one will investigate. Everyone will just shake their heads and say, 'What a tragedy, what a shame. If only she'd gotten help.'" The hired muscle chambered around. The sound echoed in the empty warehouse. Rosa's heart was hammering, but she forced herself to breathe, to think. This was the moment. Sign and live as a broken person who gave up, or refuse and die, but know that the evidence would still surface, would still destroy Drake even if she wasn't there to see it. She thought of Miguel, of Luis, of Sophia and the 4 others whose deaths were on those body cam videos, of Carmen and Ana and Jorge and 44 other families who'd been robbed and terrorized. "No," Rosa said. Drake's smile faded. He nodded at the hired muscle. "Do it." "Wait," Rosa said. She held up her zip-tied hands, wrist facing Drake. "You disabled the GPS on my phone, but not the one in my watch." Drake looked at her wrist. The smartwatch was still there, display active, showing her heart rate, which was currently at 132 beats per minute. "Standard issue for prosecutors working field investigations," Rosa said, her voice gaining strength. "Transmits location and biometric data to FBI servers every 30 seconds. When my heart rate spiked at 6:14 this morning during the kidnapping, automatic emergency protocol triggered. Federal agents were dispatched immediately." She glanced at the watch. "You have about 3 minutes before tactical team arrives." Drake stared at her. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" Rosa tilted her head, listening. In the distance, faint but growing louder, the sound of sirens. Multiple vehicles coming fast. Drake's face went white. He reached for his gun, but before he could draw it, the warehouse doors exploded inward with a crash that shook the building. "FBI, hands up! Drop your weapons!" 8 tactical agents poured through the doors, full gear, rifles raised. More agents came through the side entrance, through the back. The warehouse filled with shouting, with the laser sights of a dozen weapons all trained on Drake and his men. The hired muscle dropped his gun immediately, hands shooting up. Kowalski froze, looked at Drake, then slowly raised his hands too. Drake stood there for a moment, gun still holstered, looking at Rosa with something that might have been respect or might have been pure hatred. Then he reached for his weapon. The beanbag round hit him square in the chest before he cleared leather. Drake went down hard, the air exploding from his lungs. Agents swarmed him, rolled him onto his stomach, cuffed him. Agent Marcus Reeves walked through the chaos to Rosa, pulled a knife from his belt, cut her zip ties. "You okay, ADA Mendez?" Rosa rubbed her wrists, took her first full breath since the kidnapping. "I am now." Reeves helped her to her feet. "We've been monitoring Drake for 6 months, waiting for enough evidence to bring federal charges. Your recordings gave us everything we needed. Murder, extortion, money laundering, kidnapping a federal officer." He looked at Drake, now face down on the concrete with 3 agents securing him. "He's going away forever." "You knew my DA was compromised?" Rosa asked. Reeves nodded. "We suspected Kellerman was taking money from Drake's organization. Your investigation confirmed it. We have him on wiretaps trying to coordinate the smear campaign." He'll be arrested today, too. Rosa looked at Drake on the ground, at Kowalski in handcuffs, at the hired muscle already being read his rights. It was over. 6 months of fear, of hiding, of gathering evidence while Drake's system tried to crush her. It was finally over. "The press conference," Rosa said suddenly, checking her watch. 9:47. "I need to get to the Tribune. I need to—" "We've got a car ready," Reeves said. "You'll make it. And Rosa?" He smiled. "You did good work. Miguel would be proud." Rosa felt tears threaten and pushed them back. Not yet. Not until this was finished. She walked past Drake, who was being lifted to his feet by 2 agents, his face bruised from the beanbag round, his expression pure fury. "See you in court, Commander," Rosa said quietly. She climbed into the FBI vehicle and headed for downtown Chicago, toward the press conference, toward justice, toward the end of the story that had started 6 months ago with a promise to her cousin. The city was waking up, rush hour traffic filling the streets, people heading to work, to school, to their normal lives. And Rosa Mendez was heading to tell the truth in front of cameras, in front of the whole country, with the evidence to back up every word. Drake's empire was about to fall, and this time there would be no covering it up. The Chicago Press Club was on East Ontario Street, a building that had hosted 1,000 press conferences over the decades, most of them forgettable. This one would not be forgettable. Rosa arrived at 10:47, 47 minutes late. She half expected the room to be empty, the journalists gone, the moment lost. But when Marcus Hill opened the door to the main conference room, she saw it was packed. 50 journalists, maybe more, standing along the walls because all the seats were taken. Camera crews from CNN, ABC, local affiliates. 3 tripods set up for live streaming. Marcus checked his phone and showed Rosa the viewer count. 80,000 people watching online and climbing. "They waited," Marcus said quietly. "Everyone waited." Rosa took a breath, straightened her jacket, and walked to the podium. The room fell silent. Every camera turned toward her. Marcus stepped up first, his voice carrying the weight of 20 years covering police corruption. "Thank you for waiting. What you're about to hear is the result of an 18-month undercover investigation into Chicago's South Side precinct. Evidence of systematic extortion, false imprisonment, and murder. I'm going to let the prosecutor who gathered this evidence tell you herself." He stepped aside. Rosa gripped the edges of the podium, looked directly into the cameras, and spoke the words she'd been preparing for 6 months. "My name is Assistant District Attorney Rosa Mendez, Cook County Prosecutor's Office." She held up her badge, the real one, the one Drake had mocked as fake. "Badge number 4782. For the past 18 months, I have been operating undercover, investigating corruption at Southside Precinct." A murmur ran through the crowd. Rosa continued, her voice steady. "I began this investigation after my cousin, Miguel Mendez, died in police custody. I was told it was suicide. I was told there was insufficient evidence to prosecute. I was told to let it go." She paused. "It wasn't suicide. It was murder, and I have proof." The room erupted with questions. Rosa raised her hand and the journalists quieted. "I have documented 47 cases of illegal detention over 18 months, approximately $180,000 in extorted bail money. I have financial records showing money laundering through shell companies. I have audio recordings of threats and admissions of criminal activity." She looked directly at the camera. "And I have body camera footage proving that Commander William Drake ordered the killing of 7 individuals in police custody, then covered up their murders." She nodded to Marcus. The lights dimmed. A screen behind her lit up. The body cam footage began to play. The room watched in absolute silence as Miguel appeared on screen, young and alive and desperate, begging for his inhaler. They watched the guard walk away. They watched 12 minutes pass while Miguel's breathing became more labored. They watched him collapse. They watched Commander Drake arrive, look at Miguel dying on the floor, and say the words that would haunt every person in that room. "He's faking. Leave him." They watched Drake return 30 minutes later to find Miguel dead. Watched him order the cover-up. Watched him tell the guard, "This never happened. He hung himself." When the footage ended, the room stayed silent for a long moment. Then it exploded. Cameras flashing, reporters shouting questions, the noise level rising to chaos. Rosa waited for it to settle, then spoke over the din. Commander William Drake was arrested this morning on 7 counts of murder, along with extortion, conspiracy, money laundering, and kidnapping of a federal officer. Officer Kowalski and 6 other Southside officers are also in custody. Cook County District Attorney Robert Kellerman is under federal investigation for obstruction of justice and accepting bribes. She paused. Let that land. Justice is coming. Finally. The press conference lasted another 40 minutes. Rosa answered questions, played more audio, showed financial records. Marcus Hill distributed USB drives containing the complete evidence to every major news outlet. By noon, the story was on every channel. By evening, it was national news. By the next morning, it was international. Commander William Drake's empire didn't just fall, it was obliterated. 2 months later, Rosa stood in federal court and watched Drake shuffle into the courtroom in an orange jumpsuit and shackles. He'd aged years in 2 months. The swagger was gone. The confidence was gone. What remained was a 60-year-old man facing 7 consecutive life sentences for murder. The judge read the verdict. Guilty on all counts. The courtroom erupted in cheers from the families who'd waited years for this moment. Drake didn't look at them, didn't look at anyone, just stared straight ahead as they led him away. The compensation fund distributed $2.3 million seized from Drake's offshore accounts, his properties, his brother-in-law's shell company. 47 families received restitution. Jorge used his share to start a food truck, serving tacos on the same corner where she'd been arrested. Carmen paid off 10 years of medical debt and took her kids to Disney World for the first time. Ana set up a scholarship fund in Luis's name for Latino students pursuing careers in criminal justice. The new interim police commander was Captain Maria Herrera, a 45-year-old Latina who'd spent 20 years working her way up through the ranks without compromising her integrity. Her first act was to implement mandatory body cameras for every officer, every shift, with footage automatically uploaded to a civilian oversight board. Her second act was to hire Spanish-speaking liaison officers to rebuild trust with the community. Officer Martinez sat on the witness stand during the trial of 4 additional officers, immunity deal in hand, and broke down crying as he described the system of fear Drake had built. "I was scared," he testified, his voice cracking. "But ADA Mendez showed me that scared isn't an excuse, not when people are dying." His testimony convicted all 4. The courtroom gallery, filled with families of victims, stood and applauded when he finished. Martinez left Chicago after that, took his family to Oregon under witness protection. He sent Rosa a letter 6 months later. "I can sleep now. Thank you for showing me it was possible to do the right thing." Rosa visited Miguel's grave on a cold afternoon in November when the leaves were gone from the trees and the sky was that particular shade of gray that Chicago does better than anywhere else. She knelt in front of his headstone, placed her DA badge at the base. "I kept my promise, Primo," she whispered. "They're paying for what they did to you. Drake got 7 life sentences. He'll die in prison. Kellerman got 15 years federal. It's over." The wind carried her words away. Rosa stayed there for a while, remembering Miguel's laugh, his dreams, his music. Remembering the kid who'd wanted to study sound engineering, who'd taught her guitar chords, who'd called her Prima, and believed she could change the world. Maybe she had. A little bit. In Pilsen, the community painted a mural on the side of the building that housed the community center. Miguel's face, larger than life, smiling the way Rosa remembered. And in front of him, painted with careful detail, Rosa holding her badge. The text underneath read, "Justice delayed is not justice denied. In memory of Miguel Mendez and all those who were silenced, you are not forgotten." Rosa stood in front of it the day it was unveiled, surrounded by hundreds of people from the neighborhood. Carmen and Ana and Jorge, Judge Elena Torres, Marcus Hill, even FBI agent Reeves, who'd driven down from the Chicago field office. Tia Maria stood next to Rosa, gripping her hands so tight it hurt.
He would be proud of you,
Tia Maria said, tears streaming down her face. My Miguel would be so proud. 3 months after the trial, Rosa returned to the Cook County Courthouse, not as a defendant, not as a witness, but walking through the marble halls where she'd spent 5 years of her career. The new acting DA, appointed by the governor after Kellerman's conviction, met her in his office. We want you back, ADA Mendez, he said. The office needs prosecutors like you, people who won't look away, people who'll fight for justice even when the system fights back. Rosa looked out the window at the city below. Chicago, her city, still broken in 1,000 ways, but maybe healing, maybe learning. I need to think about it, she said. She left the courthouse and drove to Pilsen, to the community center where it had all started. The families were gathering for their monthly meeting, the support group they'd formed for victims of police violence. Anna saw Rosa first and pulled her into a hug that felt like coming home. You gave us our voices back, Anna said. Thank you. Rosa shook her head. You had your voices. I just helped amplify them. A teenage girl approached, shy, holding a notebook. Ms. Mendez, I'm Sophia. I want to be a prosecutor like you someday. I want to help people like you helped us. Rosa looked at this kid, maybe 16, with her whole life ahead of her and fire in her eyes. Then be better than me, Rosa said. Be the one who doesn't wait 18 months. Be the one who stops it on day 1. Be the one who changes the system before more people have to die to prove it's broken. Sophia nodded, wrote something in her notebook, walked away with purpose in her step. Rosa left the community center as the sun was setting, painting the Chicago sky in shades of orange and purple. She walked the streets of Pilsen, past the food trucks and the murals and the families sitting on their stoops, past the evidence of life continuing, of communities healing, of hope being slowly rebuilt. Her phone buzzed. Text from Marcus Hill. New lead on corruption in the West Side precincts. Interested? Rosa looked at the message, looked at the street around her, looked at the courthouse in the distance, where decisions about justice were made every day by people who had power and people who'd forgotten what it was for. They asked her later if it was worth it. 18 months undercover, almost dying, risking everything, losing her career, her sense of safety, her belief that the system could be trusted. She thought about Drake in handcuffs, finally facing consequences for the first time in his life. She thought about the families crying with relief when the guilty verdicts came down. She thought about Miguel's mother, Tia Maria, smiling for the first time in years, saying, he would be so proud. Justice isn't a moment, it's a process. It's messy and slow, and sometimes it costs everything you have. It requires sacrifice and patience, and the willingness to stand up even when standing up might get you killed. It requires believing that the truth matters, that evidence matters, that some things are worth fighting for even when the fight seems impossible. But when you see a mother stop crying because she finally has answers, when you see a community start trusting the system again, start believing that maybe, possibly, their voices matter, when you know that the next Miguel won't die alone in a cell while guards ignore his cries for help, while commanders cover it up, while the system protects murderers instead of victims. Rosa looked at the camera, at the audience, at everyone who'd followed this story from the beginning. Yeah, she said, it's worth it. The screen faded to black. Text appeared. Commander William Drake, sentenced to 7 consecutive life terms without parole for murder, extortion, conspiracy, and kidnapping. District Attorney Robert Kellerman, convicted of obstruction of justice and accepting bribes, 15 years federal prison, 12 officers fired from Southside Precinct, 6 convicted of various charges, $2.3 million in seized assets returned to 47 victims and their families. Southside Precinct remains under federal monitoring. Reforms include mandatory body cameras, civilian oversight board, and community liaison program. Rosa Mendez continues to fight for justice. This story is not unique. Similar corruption exists in cities across America. Every day, people are targeted, extorted, and killed by those sworn to protect them. If you want to hear more stories about people who refuse to stay silent, who fight systems designed to crush them, who prove that justice is possible even when it seems impossible, subscribe. Share this story. Make sure Miguel's name and the names of all those who were silenced are never forgotten. Because silence is what allows corruption to thrive. And the only way to break that silence is to speak the truth, loudly and publicly, until everyone listens. Thank you for watching. And remember, you have more power than you think. Use it.